July of 1187. The Crusader states stood glittering on the surface, their castles dotting the Holy Land like shining monuments to Christian triumph. But beneath the walls of Jerusalem, Antioch, and Acre, the very foundations were rotting. For almost a century, the Crusaders had carved kingdoms out of foreign soil, crowning themselves kings and princes over lands they had stolen with fire and blood. Jerusalem itself, the holiest city of Christendom, had become their crown jewel, a symbol to Europe that God's will was with them. But symbols cannot hold back armies. And the men who ruled Jerusalem were not gods. They were flawed, petty, and fatally divided. At the center of this unraveling stood King Guy of Lusignan, a man whose crown came not from valor or strategy, but from his marriage to Queen Sibylla. To his nobles, he was a weak puppet, a monarch whose throne rested on a woman's ambition rather than his own steel. His authority was challenged at every turn. His commands whispered about and undermined before they even reached the battlefield. Opposite him stood Raymond III of Tripoli, one of the most experienced and cunning commanders the Crusader states had ever produced. But Raymond did not trust Guy. Worse, he despised him. Their hatred ran so deep that Raymond, a Christian lord of the Holy Land, was willing to negotiate openly with Saladin, the Muslim commander gathering power in the east. Betrayal was no longer unthinkable. It was already happening. And then there was Reynold of Chatillon, lord of Carrick, a man as reckless as he was cruel. To him, truces were chains, and treaties mere scraps of parchment. When others sought peace, Reynold sought profit. When others held to their oaths, he spat on them. He was a warlord out of time, brutal, merciless, ungovernable. And it was Reynold's arrogance, more than any other man's, that would soon plunge the entire kingdom into ruin. For across the desert, a new kind of enemy was rising. Saladin, not a squabbling emir like those the Crusaders had faced for decades, but a unifier. A visionary. A man who believed he had been chosen by God to reclaim Jerusalem. Piece by piece, city by city, he had stitched together the fractured Muslim world into a single fist: Egypt, Damascus, Aleppo, Mosul, all sworn to his cause. The Crusaders did not know it yet, but their time was almost over. The dream of a Christian kingdom in the East was already breaking, and the fault lines were not carved by Muslim swords, but by their own greed, betrayal, and pride. In the spring of 1187, the kingdom of Jerusalem was already teetering on the edge. All it needed was a spark, and Reynold of Chatillon struck the match. Despite a truce sworn between Saladin and the Crusaders, Reynold ambushed a caravan traveling the sacred route to Mecca. Inside were merchants, pilgrims, even families on their way to perform the Hajj, one of the pillars of Islam. To the Muslim world, this was not just an act of banditry. It was sacrilege. It was war declared by arrogance. When word reached Saladin, he swore before God that he would see Reynold's blood spill with his own hand. The die was cast. But Saladin was no fool. He did not rush to vengeance blindly. He knew that to shatter the Crusader states forever, he must do more than punish Reynold. He must destroy the heart of their power, the field army of Jerusalem. So he devised a trap, a masterpiece of patience and cruelty. In July, Saladin struck the city of Tiberias, a lightly defended stronghold near the Sea of Galilee. Its walls trembled under his assault, and inside, Count Raymond's wife was trapped with only a skeleton garrison. Saladin knew the news would spread like wildfire. He knew the Crusader lords would be forced to respond. When word reached King Guy, his council erupted into chaos. Raymond of Tripoli, though his own wife was besieged, counseled restraint. Tiberias, he argued, could be rebuilt. But if they lost their army, the kingdom itself would fall. His advice was cold, logical, and politically disastrous. For what king could stand idle while the wife of his greatest rival begged for rescue? The Knights Templar roared for battle. They demanded the king act as a warrior of Christ, not as a coward counting risks. And so, under pressure, King Guy made his fateful choice. The Crusader host would march to Tiberias. It was the largest army the kingdom had ever assembled. 16,000 men, the flower of Christian knighthood, every fortress stripped of its garrison, every noble bringing his household to the field. If they triumphed, Christendom would be secure. If they fell, there would be nothing left. But they were walking into a desert designed to kill them. Saladin had already seized every well, every spring, every source of water on the road. His horse archers waited in the hills, ready to strike and vanish, never giving the Crusaders peace. The July sun beat down like a hammer, and the dust choked both man and beast. Step by step, the army weakened. Their armor became ovens, their horses collapsed, their mouths cracked with thirst. By the evening of July 3rd, the Crusaders staggered onto a barren plateau between two volcanic hills, the Horns of Hattin. The Sea of Galilee shimmered in the distance, water close enough to see, but hopelessly out of reach. Around them, Saladin's army closed in. The trap was sprung. Dawn rose on July 4, 1187, and with it came hell. The Crusader army, already choking from thirst and exhaustion, awoke to the sight of Saladin's soldiers setting fire to the dry grass around their camp. Within moments, thick, black smoke billowed across the plateau. The suffocating heat became unbearable, the smoke burned lungs and eyes, and the once proud knights of Christendom found themselves gasping like dying men in a furnace. Then came the arrows. Wave after wave of Saladin's horse archers circled the plateau, loosing clouds of death into the trapped Crusaders. Their enemies struck like phantoms, never close enough for the heavy knights to reach, never giving them a chance to fight the way they had trained. Swords and lances, the weapons of their glory, were useless against an enemy who fought with speed, distance, and precision. Desperation set in. Count Raymond of Tripoli, recognizing the noose tightening around their throats, led a desperate cavalry charge toward Lake Tiberias, hoping to break through to water. Twice his knights hurled themselves at the enemy lines. Twice they were beaten back in carnage. In the end, Raymond abandoned the field entirely, fleeing with what little remained of his household. To many, it was treason. To Raymond, it was survival. The rest were left to die. The infantry, maddened by thirst, broke ranks and scrambled up the rocky slopes of the Horns themselves. There they cowered, taking no part in the battle, watching helplessly as their noble lords fought and bled below. At the heart of the slaughter, King Guy tried to salvage honor from catastrophe. 3 times he led desperate charges against Saladin's lines, his household knights rallying to him with suicidal courage. Each time, they were driven back, their horses slain, their armor shattered, their comrades cut down. What had once been the pride of Christian knighthood, the thunder of mounted lances, dissolved into exhaustion and ruin. When the king's last charge faltered, the Crusader army ceased to exist. The battlefield became a graveyard. Of the 16,000 men who had marched from Sephoria, only a handful escaped. Thousands lay dead beneath the choking smoke, their blood soaking the earth. Thousands more dropped their weapons and fell to their knees in surrender, their fates resting in Saladin's hands. The relic they had carried into battle, the true cross itself, symbol of Christ's sacrifice, was seized by Saladin's men. To the Crusaders, it was more than a military loss. It was the death of divine favor, the shattering of God's protection. And then came the moment of vengeance. When Raynald of Chatillon, the man who had defiled the truce, was dragged before Saladin, there was no trial, no hesitation. Saladin himself drew his sword and struck Raynald down, fulfilling the vow he had made months before. Justice had come, swift and final. The Crusader dream had gone up in smoke, and the gates of Jerusalem now stood open. In the days after Hattin, the Holy Land collapsed like a sandcastle before the tide. With the Crusader army annihilated and every fortress stripped of defenders, Saladin moved with unstoppable momentum. One by one, cities that had stood for decades, Acre, Jaffa, Sidon, Beirut, Ascalon, fell without hope of relief. Only 3 months later, on October 2, 1187, the unthinkable happened. The gates of Jerusalem, the city that had been the heart of the Crusader dream for nearly 90 years, swung open to Saladin. For the Christians of Europe, the loss was apocalyptic. They had believed Jerusalem would forever remain in their hands, sanctified by divine will. And now, the holiest city of Christendom was back under Muslim control. The blow was not just military. It was spiritual. It was psychological. It was the death of an illusion. Yet within the gates, Saladin showed a mercy that shocked the world. Unlike the bloodbath that had followed the Crusaders' conquest of Jerusalem in 1099, there was no massacre. There were no rivers of blood in the streets. Those who could pay ransom were allowed to leave safely. Even those who could not were, in many cases, spared. It was a victory not only of arms, but of image, a demonstration of Saladin's power, justice, and faith. The ripple effects were seismic. When the news reached Rome, Pope Urban III is said to have died of shock. Across Europe, kings and peasants alike were stunned into action. The cry for a new holy war thundered across Christendom, birthing the Third Crusade, led by the greatest monarchs of the age: Richard the Lionheart of England, Philip Augustus of France, and Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire. And though Richard would win victories of legend, Jerusalem itself remained out of reach. The truth was clear: the world had changed forever at Hattin. The Crusaders had lost not merely a battle, but the foundation of their presence in the East. Never again would they march as the undisputed masters of the battlefield. Never again would the Muslim world be divided enough for easy conquest. Saladin had taught the lesson of unity, and his people would not forget it. The dream of a Christian kingdom in the heart of the Islamic world perished in the smoke of Hattin's burning grass. What remained was only memory. Memory of pride turned to ashes, of arrogance punished, of an entire world order broken in a single day. The horns of Hattin were not just the grave of an army. They were the grave of an empire.